Good morning and welcome back to Mae Sot, Thailand. It is Wednesday, May 13th, and I'm out running some errands in the town. So I thought I would fire up the GoPro and record a short update video. I'll have to upload it through my phone since I don't have a computer yet. And I don't know how to do that, but we'll see if I can figure that out. So I'm hoping this video will be quite short, or that I can keep it short. Well, here in Thailand, we're still under a state of emergency. I think it's been extended until the end of May, and who knows, it might be extended beyond that. We won't find out until quite a bit later. But even though there is a state of emergency, a lot of the restrictions are slowly being lifted. Every week we hear new announcements about businesses that are allowed to open. So for example, about a week or week and a half ago, they announced that barbershops and hair salons could open again. So I managed to get a haircut, which I needed because I had plans to get a new passport and I need passport photos. So it's good timing for me that the barbershops could open. And I don't know the full details about all the restrictions that have been lifted. I think there's still a nightly curfew from 10 at night till 4 in the morning. But more and more trains and planes and other transportation, like domestic travel within Thailand, more and more of those are starting to run. As far as I know, flights from outside into Thailand are still not allowed. So foreigners cannot fly into Thailand at this point. But even though a lot of the restrictions are being lifted, it doesn't really affect my life that much because I'm kind of content to hang out here. I'm still waiting to hear about other countries opening up and airports opening up so that, for example, I could go back into Myanmar or fly to Malaysia, something like that. But we still have to wait to see when that will happen. A quick change in masks. Got a new white one on. That other one I was wearing, I couldn't breathe in it. Every time I breathed in, it got sucked over my mouth and it was really hard to get any air through it, which probably means it's a good mask in terms of safety. But at least with this one, I can actually breathe, so it feels a lot better now. Yeah, over the last little while, I've been spending my time, with just a lot of errands and things like that. The main thing I had to do was figure out how to get a new passport. There was good news there because I thought I would have to go to Bangkok and go to the Canadian embassy in person to do that. And of course, they discourage people from actually going to the embassy. But it turns out that you can also send your application in by courier, and then they will send the new passport back to you by courier, so I can give them my address at the airport, at the hotel in Mae Sot, and I can just do it long distance. The downside to getting a new passport overseas is that it takes 20 days. So 20 days of processing time plus whatever, 2 or 3 days in transit. So you're looking at, 3 to 4 weeks before I even get a new passport. So you're really taking a chance when you do that. You could send away your passport to get it renewed and then find out that you need your passport to do some banking or to do some immigration thing or something like that. A little bit of an interruption in the day there. 2 pretty large black dogs came rushing out at me. They seemed pretty determined to take a bite out of my calves, so I stopped to fend them off there for a second. The trick with any kind of dogs I've learned over the years is all you have to do is lean down. Like if you lean down as if you're going to pick up a rock, they know that motion very well. And if they see you bend over, they instantly run away. But they did take me by surprise there. They came rushing out of the corner and were on me before I was even aware of them. So one small adventure was getting passport photos. All these little errands seem to be much more complicated for me than for other people. I never hear other people tell these stories, but they're just a standard part of my life. In this case, for example, I went to this photo studio to get passport photos. And you think you could just say, you know, I need passport photos, and they take them and then they give them to you in a couple hours or the next day. And that would be the end of it. But it turns out that the passport photos they make are not the right size. You know, I got the information package from the Canadian Embassy, and it tells you exactly how large the photos have to be. And they were quite a bit larger than what they make here. Of course, at the photo studio, they have a big display of all the sizes they offer. And there must have been, I don't know, a dozen or 2 dozen different sizes, but none of them matched the dimensions I needed. So we had to have a long discussion about that. And they had to set up a custom order for me to give me the size that I needed. And we eventually got that figured out, and I had my picture taken. And then I came back the next day, in the afternoon to pick them up. And the pictures were fine, except that because the requirements for the Canadian passport were so large, you know, the photo was so much bigger than all the other sizes that they made, the size of my head also increased. So I had this big photo with a huge head on it, and it's doubtful whether it would be acceptable as a passport photo, because you also get details about the minimum and maximum size for your head in the photo. And I thought that would just happen automatically. But when I measured my head in this photo, if you measure my actual head, chin to top of my head, it was far too big, and it exceeded the maximum size for a Canadian passport photo. So after some careful measuring and figuring things out, I went back to this place and I asked to get a second set of passport photos. And this time I explained as well as I could the dimensions that the head used to be, that the head needed to be. And of course, with the language barrier, this was really quite complicated, and I don't think the woman there was used to concepts like how the head has to be minimum 31 millimeters, maximum 46 millimeters. This was all new to her, and she's busy measuring things on the computer and trying to figure out how to get all the dimensions just right. Anyway, it was a very complicated process, and I'm sure it was much more complicated than it is for most other people. I don't know why this stuff always happens to me, but it usually does. I just went to the studio just now and picked up my new set of photos, and I think they will work. If anything, they might actually end up being too small. They're right at the limit for the minimum size, I think. But again, that depends on how you define these things. Because even the information package from the Canadian Embassy is not that clear. It has a oval to indicate the size of your head, like a perfect oval that looks like a head. But then it says that your face must be between 36 millimeters, 31 millimeters, and 46 millimeters. So what does face mean? Like just from chin to forehead? But if it's chin to forehead, why is the sample of an entire head? So I didn't really know what to tell the woman, you know, that my head has to be a certain dimension or my face has to fit within certain dimensions. The whole thing was a bit of a complicated mess. But I ended up with some passport photos, and I think we're good to go. The other passport issue is that the instructions say that one of the passport photos has to have the company stamp on the back with the date that the photo was taken. So for the first few days, I was actually wandering all over Mae Sot trying to find a photo studio that could do this for me. And it turns out it is not as easy as you'd think. A lot of these places didn't have stamps at all. You know, I saw that they made passport photos, and I would go in there to talk to them about it. and everything seemed okay. But then I would ask them, can you put a stamp on the photo, like an official stamp with the address of your store? And none of them had one of these stamps. And then when I found a photo shop that did have a stamp, they told me that they couldn't do it. And for the obvious reason that when you stamp the back of a photo, the ink doesn't stick, it doesn't dry. So no matter how long you wait, you can wait days, but even after several days, that ink will just smear right off. So they can stamp it, but the second your finger or thumb or anything touches it, the whole stamp just smears right off, and you can't read it anymore. So I don't know how you get around that. At first I didn't know anyway, because the Canadian government, demands that one of these photos has a stamp on it, and yet has nobody at the Canadian Embassy figured out that ink does not stick to photographic paper? At least it doesn't anymore. Maybe it used to in the past. But all these photo studios that I went into, they would actually demonstrate it for me. They would take an old photo that they threw in the garbage, put a stamp on the back, and we blow on it and wave it around and dry it. But the second you touch it with anything, even put it inside an envelope, whoop, all the ink just smears right off it. And you'd think you could put a sticker on instead, but the instructions say explicitly that you're not allowed to use a sticker. It has to be an ink stamp, and yet an ink stamp was impossible. So we seem to be at a bit of an impasse there too. But then someone much smarter than me did some research online and found out that you can also write the address by hand. So you could actually use a pen and write the address of the shop and write the date by hand. So I think I'll be able to track down like a ballpoint pen and find a type of ink that will stick to photographic paper. So that's another problem that I was dealing with. So I'm walking down one of the streets here in Mae Sot. You can see it's pretty busy. Almost overnight, Mae Sot seems to have changed. It was kind of like a ghost town for a while, and now it's back to normal. And like any town in Thailand, you can barely walk down the street. There's so much traffic and so many vehicles blocking the way. So yeah, things are changing very fast all of a sudden. It stayed the same for a long time, and then overnight, the mood has changed, the atmosphere has changed, and it feels almost like the city has gone back to normal. I'm slowly walking towards the computer store, and it'll be interesting to see what they have to say. Yeah, that's a whole story too. Just tell it briefly. I first brought my laptop to this computer shop, and we examined it together. We put together this big worksheet about what I wanted done, what was wrong with the laptop, and what I wanted them to fix. And then a few days went by, about a week maybe, and then I got a phone call. I couldn't understand what they were saying on the phone, of course, so I walked to the shop to speak to them in person, and they said the motherboard had been fried. So the motherboard needed to be replaced, but they had a motherboard there that was a match for my computer, and they could just switch out the motherboard. They had one in stock. They're going to take out my old motherboard, put in the new one, but they needed my okay to do that because it would cost about $55, and that seemed like a great price to me. I was more than willing to pay $55 for a new motherboard. Seemed quite low, in fact, the price. So I was pleased with that. So I left, and then they said they would call me when it was done. So I waited and waited and waited, I don't know, 10 days, something like that. I never heard from them. So I happened to be in this neighborhood again, getting a haircut, in fact, or trying to get a haircut at that time. And I was right beside the computer store, so I popped in just to see what was going on. brand new technician again. Every time I go in there, it's a new guy, so I've never spoken to the same technician twice, which has made things even more complicated. But anyway, I spoke with this new technician, and he said a completely different story. He told me something completely different. He said that the motherboard was fried, but they had no replacement for it, and they would have to try to fix it. So I don't know what changed. The one guy said they had a motherboard and they're just going to replace it. This guy now said no, they didn't have a motherboard and they had to fix it. And then I tried to find out how much this would cost. Like, a new motherboard was $55, but how much would it cost to fix this motherboard, and how long would it take? But no matter how many different ways I asked those questions, I couldn't get an answer. So eventually I just left it with them and said, you know, okay, thank you very much. And they said they would call me when they had fixed the motherboard. So I left, waited maybe another week or something like that. Never heard from them. So I went back to the store eventually. I didn't want to keep bugging them, but I mean, they weren't contacting me, so I had to do something. So I came back to the store. This was on Sunday, I think. No, Saturday. I think it was on Saturday. So I went in, and brand new technician again, a guy I'd never seen before. And he told me the same story about how the motherboard had to be fixed. And he said quite clearly to me that he was going to fix it today, that day, and it would be ready the next morning, and they would call me and tell me when it's done. And that was 4 or 5 days ago, and I haven't heard from them. So here I am one more time, just to see, like, maybe they fixed it and they've been waiting for me to come back and pick it up. I don't know why they didn't call me. It's all been a bit of a mystery, and it's taken far longer than I anticipated. If I knew it was going to take this long, I would have just bought a new computer, just a basic cheap one right from the beginning, just to tide me over. But we'll see. Fingers crossed. I'm going to turn off the GoPro and then head inside the shop and see what happens. Every time I walk in there, the clerks look up and they see me, you know, a foreigner coming in, and they get this look of panic on their face. You know, it's like, no, it's the foreigner. He's going to yell at us or something. But no, I've never yelled at them, and I've been very polite and smiling all the time. So we'll see whether my patience has paid off and my laptop has been repaired. My feeling is no. My feeling is they're going to tell me that they tried to repair the motherboard, but it couldn't be done. So we'll see. Here we go. Well, that was suitably weird. I walked in, and it was a brand new guy again I'd never seen before. He had no idea why I was there or what I was talking about. But then one of the women recognized me, and she spoke to the guy. He went into the back room, came out with my laptop, gave it to me, and then just walked away. So I'm standing there holding my laptop, and I have no idea what's going on. Everybody had just walked away and left me there. So I had to ask them, kind of using like a thumbs up or thumbs down, like, did you fix it? Could you fix it? And not surprisingly, they said no. And this time it was so weird. They said the problem was with the motherboard. And to them, that was like, well, if it's a problem with the motherboard, there's nothing we can do, obviously. If the motherboard is broken, we can't fix the computer. That's just the way it is. And yet, for what feels like a full month now, they've been telling me all the different ways they're going to replace the motherboard and fix the motherboard. But now, apparently, if the problem concerns the motherboard, that means the laptop is dead and there's nothing they can do about it. After that, I stuck around for a little while because we had discussed this many times previously, and I told them that if they couldn't fix the computer, there was no possibility of repairing it, I'd like them to remove the hard drive and put it inside a portable enclosure so that I can access the files on that drive somehow and recover the files. And we talked about this at length. It was written in the worksheet. I'd even picked out a hard drive enclosure. This was all settled. But of course, none of that had happened. And so now I was talking to this guy, a new guy, and I was trying to tell him how I'd like him to remove the hard drive and put it in an enclosure. But he had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. Nobody there seemed interested in dealing with me anymore, so I just turned around and left. So overall, I'd have to say that was a very frustrating experience from beginning to end. I was kind of glad to walk out of there without getting my hard drive removed, because at this point I'm just tired of those guys at that shop and I don't want to deal with them anymore. And I'm going to do a bit of research to find out the best way to remove a hard drive and get an enclosure for it and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to look for a better computer shop here in Mae Sot. There must be one better than that one. Even though, as I said at the beginning, it's quite a big and professional looking place. You know, it looks like a place you could trust. But as far as customer service goes, they've got a bit of work to do. At the very least, call the customer when you say you're going to call him, and don't leave him waiting week after week after week when they're doing absolutely nothing on the laptop. So that is the end of my errands for today. Passport photos was successful. Laptop repair, not so much.